Test, test. Can you guys hear me? Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here this morning. My name is Kelsey Doom. I'm the president and CEO at the Brookings Area Chamber of Commerce and the staff liaison for the Public Affairs Committee, which is the advocacy arm of the Brookings Area Chamber of Commerce. So we have a few in the crowd today. I just want to recognize real quick. We have Cam Jones in the back. He's with Edward Jones. That is our public affairs chair this year. And Matt Krogman next to him. That is our lobbyist who's out in Pierre many hours during session away from his business and family. So thank you so much, Matt. We have generations of people here today. Mr. Dan Hansen brought his son Noah. Thank you for coming, Noah. So yeah, we have a few thank yous real quick. First of all, thank you to the City of Brookings for allowing us this space and to Kweku for recording and putting this out on the city's channel. We really appreciate that accessibility. We want to thank the Brookings Economic Development Corporation and First Bank and Trust, who are two sponsors of the Public Affairs Committee and the way that we're able to put these on without charge, offer them free to the community. And so we really thank our sponsors for the season. We have a couple event sponsors, Brookings Register and Cool Beans Coffee. Cool Beans is providing the coffee in the back if you get thirsty. And the Brookings Register ran all of our ads and press releases free of charge. So we really appreciate both of those small businesses here in Brookings and longtime members at that. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over. We have Angela Boersma as our moderator today with Andy Foberg up there helping her organize questions. So if you guys have any questions, there are slips of paper on this table in the back. And then Leanne, if you want to wave there. Leanne Pierce is, if you have a question, you can raise your hand. She'll bring you a slip of paper, and then she can grab those and bring them up to the moderator. So without further ado, Angie, I'll let you take it away.
Sounds good. Thanks, Kelsey. Good morning, everyone. We're going to jump right in because there's a lot to get through already, and we haven't even started. So I'm gonna open it up right away with Representative Tiedemann, and we'll work our way down for some opening comments this morning.
Well, thank you, and thank you for hosting this. It's good to be back in person rather than either Zoom or canceled because of illness that kind of spread across the three of us. But it's been an interesting session. I think there's a lot of moving parts. As we said earlier on, it's an M&M session, marijuana and money. Lots of both, lots of bills on both of them. And as we move through the process, we see that there's a lot of different ideas on how to spend that money, but it's narrowing down. This year, I think that in the House, we did a much better job of managing our flow of bills, and so we only went from 12 until 7 at night, a little after 7, for a crossover day. That's when those bills have to move from one chamber to the next chamber, and if they don't, they're dead, unless you can resurrect them by hog housing or finding other ways to find those dollars. But look forward to the questions that we have before us, and I'll turn it over to the next one.
Representative Reed.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for coming, and thank you to the Chamber for hosting this event. I guess I won't agree with everything that Representative Tiedemann talked about on how things are going. Crossover Day really went pretty efficiently. We're pretty happy. The only thing that kind of struck us during Crossover Day is the night before, and sometimes you hear about hog housing or vehicle bills. There were a few bills that were thrown in that really didn't have any input committee-wise. And so that was the only thing that kind of threw us. But I think most of those, because of that process, ended up being defeated, just because there wasn't enough look at them committee-wise. Otherwise, I think I'll just go ahead and wait for the questions.
Senator Smith.
Good morning, everybody. This past week was probably the toughest week I've ever spent in Pierre. There are so many issues. Many are emotional for people. Twice this week I was threatened to be postcarded if I didn't vote a certain way on a particular bill. And frankly, I appreciate the passion some people have, but that doesn't intimidate me to be postcarded. You get so much information from so many people. At its height, I was getting over 300 emails a day. I will respond to the people from Brookings. It's difficult to respond to people from Hot Springs. But there are a lot of issues out there, and, we talked about the illness that we had. I got COVID the third week of Pierre, while in Pierre, and I still suffer from brain fog because of it. And I'm not asking for patience with people, but I talk a little slower than I used to. Maybe that's a good thing. But you work through all of that. I'm always mindful of where I come from. I love the fact that after a tough week, I walked into Hy-Vee this morning, and there was a friendly smile in every aisle. It was good to see a lot of people that I know that send good wishes. And so it was nice to come home and see friendly faces. And I keep coming back to this. The three of us are just trying to do the best we can with what we know. And the great thing about the Brookings group is we all get along extremely well. We look out for each other. We support each other. And I don't see that as much in other districts. And so we are a team. That's how we look at it. And I know we appreciate the opportunity to represent you and Pierre. Thank you.
Thanks so much. I'm going to ask all of you to make sure that your mics are nice and close to your face so that it broadcasts well for everybody at home. We're going to start right in on Senate Bill 198. So this is VJ's bill. Can you please share your thoughts and your support of this bill? Explain a little bit to the folks that are listening what that's about.
Okay, thank you for the question. In the last dozen years, I have been in almost every school in the state of South Dakota. I've been in more schools than any other legislators because of what I do for a living. 10 years ago, superintendents and teachers never talked about discipline issues. Never. They may say something about salary, but never discipline. In the last 3-4 years, that's all I ever hear about the discipline issues in their schools. And hearing that, and then being reinforced all the time, I felt we needed to act. We needed to do something. And thus, Senate Bill 198 was born. I have to tell you, a week ago, I got interviewed by a reporter from the Argus Leader, and we had a nice conversation. And as I told her, I am not interested in locking kids up. I'm not interested in that. It does no good to have anybody in jail. The next day, I looked online, and the headline was, Senate wants to lock up more kids. Holy fake news. That is not what we talked about. I understand that there are a lot of kids that come from difficult situations in life. You know what we need to do, really? We need to have 2 to 3 times the number of counselors in schools to take care of some of these issues. But it's ignored. And so, thus the bill. And I have to tell you, I was surprised by the scope of the individuals who stepped forward when it was in Senate State Affairs and said we need to do this, including the State's Attorneys Association and the Associated School Boards and various superintendents, the ones that feel it each and every day, because as I shared there, we have 600 teacher openings in South Dakota right now. And I'll guarantee it's going to grow. And they're not leaving because of salary. They're leaving because of discipline issues within the schools. And substitute teachers, they don't want to come. You know, their heart says, I want to come teach, but they can't handle the environment that they're in. I am not interested in locking up kids. I want kids to get help. But I'll say one more thing. You know, when I was a kid, and I see some of you that are a little bit older in this room, along with me, the worst thing a parent could tell you is that you are on a one-way ticket to Plankington. There was always that threat out there. You did not want to go there. And we lost Plankington several years ago, and we lost Star Academy. Now we send these kids out of state. And I'm going to try to get a handle on how many kids we send out of state and how much it's costing the state of South Dakota to send the kids out of state. But that threat is gone. That end threat is gone. And that's a place for the toughest kids, but it's a place where kids can also be or experience some type of rehabilitation. You know, I am not interested in locking up kids. And the other thing, I'm sorry, Andrew, one more thing. You know, Brookings, we're in an interesting situation. We have a lot of resources in this community. We do. We have the Boys and Girls Club with the diversion program. We're very fortunate to live here. But a lot of communities don't have what we have. The diversion programs and the other types of things that they can do to help kids out. And so what that bill is going to do is bring about an interim study. And it doesn't go into effect until the 1st of July of 2023, by the way. An interim study with 18 parties, 18 individuals to come together and try to figure this thing out. Improve what we have. That's the purpose of it. Don't want to see kids locked up. Thank you.
Representative Reed.
Thank you, and thank you to Senator Smith for bringing this. My first 2 years out in the legislature, people were saying, just give this a little time. Let's see if it'll work. Then the next 2 years, it was kind of, well, this isn't quite working. And then in the last couple of years, it's really kind of blown up. But nobody's been able to grab a hold of it. And it just to kind of what the bill does, and just to get more mechanical about it, is if there's no change during the next session, all of the previous bill that did the juvenile justice reform is completely repealed and pulled out. And so what's good about this, and again, what I applaud the senator for doing this, is that committee's got to get something done, or it all goes away. Sometimes you need that. Sometimes you need to have that deadline. Otherwise, we'll just keep trying to nibble around it or kind of complain about it and not really get any changes. And so I like the way that the senator has put it together, and hopefully that we'll have some great conversations as it's coming over to the House. Correct? You have passed it?
Representative Tiedemann, any further thoughts to add?
Well, there's not a lot to add to that. I agree with with Representative Reed. I love the passion that Senator Smith has shown on this bill. I was there when we passed Senate Bill 70 and Senate Bill 73, and the reason that they were passed is because what we had in place wasn't working either. And we were sending youth to out-of-state sites as well as housing them in South Dakota, even back then when that bill, before it was passed. But we have to get at the core issue of what is the problem. What is the problem that's going on? And I'm hoping that the task force looks at that rather than flying too high and really gets at the core issue of the problem.
Thank you. We're going to stay on the topic of education for a bit and specifically look at House Bills 1337 and 1012 related to education censorship. So specifically, these two look at divisive concepts in higher education, and then 1337 notes the title as Protecting Elementary and Secondary Education from Political Indoctrination. They started in the House. They're both House bills. So I'm going to let you guys talk first, and then Senator Smith, I think one of those at least comes in front of you this week. So thoughts on those bills related to education censorship? Tiedemann.
Well, House Bill 1012 really has been, you could say, gutted, neutered, totally changed from when it first started. So even the Board of Regents came on board and said that they supported what was there. They're already doing those things in House Bill 1012. I think that is a good way to solve things. The original bill would have been a definite no vote for me. House Bill 1337, I don't know if that's if that got killed in the Senate or if it's still alive, but that one also was gutted. The critical race theory is not even in the words right now. So totally changed from when it came forward. Sometimes you get that initial reaction, and so you have to wait till you see the final version before you think about voting.
Representative Reed.
Sure. As a matter of fact, just kind of continuing on to what Representative Tiedemann said, it was originally had CRT in 1337, and we had to do what's called a name amendment because critical race theory actually wasn't in it. I do think it has to be looked at for what it's being said. For example, in I think this is 1012 that I'm looking at. In 1012, it says, that may be construed or to inhibit or violate the First Amendment rights of any student or employee, or to undermine the duty of an institution under the control of this one's Board of Regents, Board of Technical Education, to protect to the greatest degree academic freedom, intellectual diversity, and free expression. And so that line right there says you can teach. You can talk about, the theories. You can talk about all this. It's just that you can't force anybody, to pledge to it. For example, also, in the beginning of it, when it talks about divisive concepts, it talks about that, you shouldn't be saying that just because of the virtue of your race, is just totally defines who you are. That doesn't mean that you're that way. That doesn't mean that you're racist just because of the color of your skin, one way or the other. And so there was, like the Representative Tiedemann said, they did a lot of work in House education, and that's why it actually says it's hog-housed, I think, at the top of it. They made so many amendments to it that it wasn't in its previous form that it came. And so I think we get a lot of discussion around, well, this is a CRT bill. No, it wasn't a CRT bill. It just talked about, in the ways that we do teach children, we can still teach about race. We can teach about critical race theory because it is a theory. You can't stop anybody, from talking about a theory. And so that's really what these bills ended up being about. And that's why you see it actually pass through the House with a pretty reasonable amount of yes votes.
Thank you. Senator Smith, 1337 is in front of you this week. Your thoughts?
Well, I'm in Senate Education and have been there for during my entire time in the legislature. And so we're going to see these two bills on Tuesday morning, beginning at 7:45. Honestly, because of last week and the previous weeks, you pay a lot of attention to the bills that originate in your chamber. For instance, the focus was on Senate bills, and all of a sudden the House bills are coming over. But there's certain House bills that you hear about in advance. These two I heard about. Let me just say, there's a reason why freedom of speech is in our First Amendment guarantees. It's a very slippery slope. And when you read these, especially in their original version, because I was really concerned about constitutional issues. One is obviously has to do with higher education, the other one K through 12. 1337 does. Let me tell you about the issue I have with 1337. Because it says right in there, if someone feels discomfort. First time I ever saw a bill that said feels anything. Feels discomfort. What does this mean? Let me go back 100 years and should this go through, if a person is of strong religion, an evangelical Christian, and they're being taught evolution, if the student is in that classroom, are they going to declare they feel discomfort? And I don't know the answer to that question. So I struggle. I struggle with both of these, and I understand there's a lot of work that was been done on these on the House side, and I'm grateful for it. So I'm going to wait and hear the proponents and the opponents on Tuesday and come to a final conclusion on all this. But again, the reason why this country is great is because of freedom of speech. And we may not always like what we hear, but people have a right to say certain things. And I don't like the thought that a teacher or a professor is constantly looking over his or her shoulder, wondering if what they're saying is being listened to. And they're going to be called on the carpet for it. It's a concern. And so I'm going to listen to the debate on Tuesday. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a reminder, if you have questions, the slips are in the back, and want to encourage folks to put their questions up here, and we'll make sure that they get asked. We're going to stay on the topic of higher education for a little bit. House Bill 1243. Representative Tiedemann, you're a prime sponsor on this one. There's been lots of debate around tuition costs and the conversation about how tuition might be addressed, I think, is one folks are interested in hearing.
Yes, 1243 went to Education Committee and then was referred to House Appropriations. It was a bill that would pick up and buy down the tuition and fees. When you give a 6% increase to state employees, about 45% of the Board of Regents employees are paid on general funds, and 55% are paid on tuition and fees, or other funds, or federal funds. So what do? If you're going to give a 6% raise, with those that are paid on tuition, you have to increase tuition and fees, and would have been about a 4.5% increase. So the bill that I brought forth was mainly for discussion, because that bill would have been for one-time money, and you have to have ongoing revenue when you put it on salaries. But I needed something to bring the point to the body to talk about. And so at least they're discussing it. And now the way that it can be changed is through a motion sheet when the Joint Appropriations puts together the general bill. It's still alive. It's still being talked about. Because if we want to do something for the future, long term, is we can keep those tuition and fee dollars costs down.
Thank you. Representative Reed.
Just to add to that, the conversation is alive. You know, there's been quite a few discussions around the House on this, and even extending it to technical education, because there is, we did have a big increase in our tax revenue, although we got to see what's going to happen over the next few years, just because of all the money that's coming through the economy with the federal subsidies and such. We got to be careful of that. But it was the idea of some of those funds, could they be used to at least do this for a while, just to help drive down the cost of technical and higher education.
Senator Smith, any follow-up comments?
Thank you. The one thing I want to say is I applaud former Senator and now Representative Tiedemann for bringing this forward. We always talk about the importance of keeping higher education affordable. And this is a perfect example of looking into the future and keeping all the public education institutions reachable for a lot of people. So thank you, former Senator and now Representative Tiedemann.
As a follow-up, what are your thoughts on the proposed 6% increase? I might start with Representative Reed right in the middle so that you don't have to go second every time.
No problem. Yes. It from what we're seeing from all of the budget numbers, 6% is reasonable. I don't see a reason why we should not do it. There's always that concern of the fiscal cliff that could be coming. But I think we got to do the 6% here. And I'm thinking that there'll be some money put away, in the future that could help us just in case we do see that fiscal cliff, to protect that 6%, because you don't want to go backwards. You don't want to go negative like Governor Dugard had to do a few years ago, and actually do cuts. And so, but I'm for it, definitely for this year.
Senator Smith.
I'd like to say what he said. but it is no secret the rampant inflation that we're experiencing right now. Some of us in this room are old enough to remember the early 70s. We experienced something called hyperinflation, and it was on the minds of everybody. And they haven't coined it as hyperinflation yet, but they ought to. I'll give you a personal situation. When we're legislators, we get to eat so healthy. we do. I'm about meatballed out, and those little weenies, I'll never eat them again. But a lot of times that we have to take a meal on the fly, and it's a shock when you go to McDonald's and order number one for breakfast, which happens to be an Egg McMuffin, hash browns, and a cup of coffee, and it's $10. It's a shock. And so the 6% that we're talking about is in response to what's happening out there. And as Representative Reed said, we worry what's going to happen in 2 years, 3 years, where this enormous amount of money has come in, where we're going to be. And there is going to be a come to Jesus moment in 3 years for all public sector employees. There just will be. And it's going to be difficult, and we have to be careful. But I believe it's appropriate to give a 6% this year in order to combat hyperinflation.
Representative Tiedemann.
Yes, I support the 6% for state employees, K-12 education, and the Medicaid providers. If you think of what they have gone through in the last 2 years, dealing with COVID-19, going to remote learning, a whole new ballgame for university professors as well as K-12 teachers, as well as what the families have gone through. So I think they're very deserving of the 6% increase. I agree that we have a lot of things right now facing us when we're talking about ongoing dollars. South Dakota is unique. We're doing so much better than other states. Our economy is blossoming. But is it because of all of the federal dollars coming in? Is it because we kept businesses open? We don't know the exact answer. But right now we're in a situation with inflation. In the 80s, we had 20% interest. And farmers were having to sell their farms, and businesses were going through trouble. But 20% on $1,000 land is not as bad as 1.5 or 7% on $10,000 land. So you have to look at what we're looking at. Plus, we're now in a situation where the world is kind of unrest. What's going to happen with exports? What's going to happen with oil prices? If we have $6 gas, how many people are going to come to South Dakota for tourism? Last year was fantastic. But you have to look into the future, and so I support the 6% now. I think we need to put it out there, but let's be very careful going any further than that out into the future.
Thank you. We're going to keep talking about tax a little bit. House Bill 1327 was the proposed reduction in sales tax. There's some conversation about alternatives to that idea, and what about eliminating food tax or other things. That one passed the House. Both Tim and Larry, you voted no, and then it died in Senate. I think there's some curiosity about what would make that a better bill, and then kind of your thoughts on voting no. Oh, start with Larry.
Well, thank you for that question. Yes, I did vote no. A couple reasons. One, it was one of those that was hog house late at night. There was no opposition testimony because there was nobody there. And it should go through a policy committee, i.e. taxation committee, before it just comes out of appropriations in the House. That was one reason. The other reason is that when that bill was passed, it said that it would go down with the Partridge Amendment. It said it would go down 0.1% whenever it went over 20 million per year over year. It has never done that. Number two, yes, there was a promise to reduce it if it did happen, but it hasn't happened yet. The other reason is that when that bill was passed, there was 30 million that was put out there for property tax reduction. How was that going to be covered? That wasn't addressed when he presented it on the floor. Ag gave up 2 million of that to go for the bond payment on the Animal Disease Research and Diagnostic Lab here on campus. That's another 22 years, I think, that has to go forward. Maybe 21 now. I lose count. But none of those things were addressed. Those were also promises that were made when that bill was passed. And then my concern is that if you look into the future, both LRC, Legislative Research Council, their analysts, and Bureau of Finance and Management analysts said right now we're doing fantastic. But in FY24 and FY25, get ready, it's a cliff. And I don't want to go back to having to cut people when you've given them something.
Senator Smith.
In a committee, we say, Madam Chair, point of order.
Yes, sir.
You know, you get used to things. But Representative Reed or Tiedemann, could you explain for these people what it means by hog housing? Because we use that like common language, but a lot of people don't know where it came from and how it's used. I think it'd be useful.
Well, it's actually coined in South Dakota, hog house. The crossover day had come and gone. The swine barn burnt at SDSU. They needed a bill to finance the rebuild of that swine barn. So they came up with this. They found a bill. They totally changed it. It's called hog housing. It's coined specifically for South Dakota. When the dairy farm started on fire this year, we were going to do a milk house. But we didn't have to because we passed the bill a year ago, giving them the money to remodel or replace the dairy barn. But that's how it is done. So you can take a bill that's in front of you, totally strip everything out, and put a new bill on top of it. It's called hog housing. Usually you wait until it crosses over to the other chamber. And it used to be that if your name was on there as the prime sponsor, you got to carry the bill even though it wasn't your bill. They've allowed that to change now because with electronics you can switch names and pull your name off from a bill, do whatever. But that's a hog house, and that's what they did that night. It was a vehicle bill, not a Ford or a Chevy, but just a bill said to enhance the economy in South Dakota. And they took that and stripped it all out and put their bill on to reduce the taxes.
Thank you for the civics lesson and the color commentary. Representative Reed.
And so when that happens, you know, we can't just get rid of hog housing. We can't just get rid of vehicle bills because it's needed. But usually what you do is you'll go in, you'll make the amendment on a committee, and then you'll let it sit for a day or two so people can read it and see what it's about. And you can't do this under the cover of darkness, and that was several bills that came through that way. Back to this bill, and I agree with everything that Representative Tiedemann said, the other issue is one of the arguments was, well, if inflation goes up, we'll raise more taxes. It's like, well, wait a minute, that doesn't mean the money supply went up. That doesn't mean your personal income went up. That means you might just have to buy less. So there's not going to be an increase in revenue because of inflation. That just didn't hold water. And so a lot of the arguments, this should have been discussed much earlier, gone through tax committee. I think before, if this was something to do, come back to again. We're worried about that fiscal cliff. Let's give the 6%, and then let's not go backwards in the future. As far as could you do this with a food tax or something there? There's been a lot of times that's been discussed, and then do you increase the rate and then take it away from food? That's always a valid discussion. But again, just to say, well, we're going to just remove it off of food tax, we still would have had the loss of revenue, and we could have had a problem in future years.
Thank you. Senator Smith.
Well, talking about the future, and I understand it was killed in Senate State Affairs, and if it came to the floor, I would have joined in the effort to kill it. And here's something that's dealing with reality. Medicaid expansion. I never would have thought in November of 2020 that the voters of South Dakota were going to pass medical marijuana 70 to 30%. Never would have thought that. I never would have thought recreational marijuana would go 54-46. And should Medicaid expansion come to pass in November, we're going to have to find a lot of money. And I don't think the timing would be right to go backwards on a revenue stream, especially when we're really facing a difficult situation. And here's the deal. If Medicaid expansion goes through, then there's going to be pressure placed on all these other state agencies K through 12 would be affected down the road. Where's the money coming from? It's a concern. And I think this came too soon because there are a lot of unanswered questions floating around right now. Thank you.
Thank you for the perfect segue into Senate Bill 186, which relates specifically to Medicaid expansion. It did fail, but there's some conversation about, Larry as a sponsor on the House side. VJ, you voted no in committee, but yes on the floor. Explain yourselves.
That's being a political type, isn't it? Let me go back to committee and why I voted no. I originally moved that bill go to the floor without recommendation. In other words, oftentimes in committee we say, I move do pass on Senate Bill 2, which is an endorsement by the committee that this should happen on the floor of the Senate. I moved with no recommendation, and it was defeated. So when it came up, do pass out of the committee, I voted against it because I didn't want to say, hey, the committee truly believes this way. When it got to the floor, and it's something that's something that I said in committee, with apologies to Benjamin Franklin, the only things certain in life are death, taxes, and Medicaid expansion. And I really believe it's going to happen. And I think we're going to have to get ready because it seems like every state that votes on it with their general population, it goes through. And so when it came to the floor, I hear the cries saying, hey, look, something's got to happen, A. B, we need to be prepared for that moment, but I don't know if it's a good idea to have it in the Constitution. And so, yes, I voted for it. Obviously, it lost, but just trying to deal with reality, knowing it's probably going to happen in November. I'm guessing now, but they're talking about the behemoths. We're talking about Sanford, Monument, and Avera putting $3 million into a campaign, a marketing campaign to get this passed. $3 million can buy you a lot of advertising in South Dakota. It can. And I think the voters will respond. So that's the reason why I changed my mind. I'm not the first political person that's changed their mind.
It's fine. It's really fine. Representative Reed.
Actually, you explained that very well. I mean, that does happen at times where you got to vote against because of the first thing that you wanted to have done. One thing that's really important when we talk about Medicaid expansion is that it's going the bill is an amendment to the Constitution. Okay, that puts it in. That's hard. I mean, that's our document. That's where we start government. And so it says you have to do Medicaid, and it starts to limit how the legislature can manage it then. And that's what was trying to be attempted here is let's just put it into code so we can control it. And if we end up with that fiscal cliff, we can back down on it, right? If we don't have the money, we can back down on it. But when it's in the Constitution, 100%, we got to do it. And the other thing that's in the Constitution that was being studied by, and the main sponsor for this was Senator Steinhauer, brilliant, understands this stuff. He caught, and working with other folks, that there's a line in there that basically says that it has to be equal for everyone. And in that line, that means you could not have any work requirement for Medicaid. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that it just really limits you on. And so that's why I think this bill was going forward is to help with that and say, listen, as Senator Smith said, there's a good chance this is going to hit us anyway. And so how can we best control it? So I think that's what the bill was about.
Representative Tiedemann.
Well, and again, I supported it for those reasons because, one, we can put some things in place. If it goes in the Constitution, it's locked in. I don't think that should go to the Constitution, but everybody will have the chance to vote on it this fall. If this had passed, they may have pulled that off from the ballot this fall. But Senate Bill 102 is still alive. And that's the one that would create the fund to put some of the money that we're currently saving on the FMAP rate, what we have our match rate, because with the ERA funds, about 6% is being covered by that. For every percent, that's $7 million. That's $42 million. That portion of that could be put into a fund if this does pass. And we did it back in 2012 when we had the ERA funds. And we told social services, here's $20 million. You can't spend it without approval from appropriations. But we didn't know how many eligibles were going to be there for Medicaid. We didn't know if it was going to go down or go up. But we said, this is in reserve. To me, it's good business sense to take and save some of this money, put it in a fund, and say, okay, if Medicaid expansion passes, it's going to cost us $22 million more right there. The first 2 years, not as bad, but then it goes up, and you're going to be looking at closer to $40 million. So I think as good businessmen, we should consider putting some of the dollars that we currently have away. It's called a savings account.
Senator Smith.
Yeah, if I could just add on to that, you know, one of the remarkable things, you don't realize it when you run the first time. So when I ran in 2018, I had very little knowledge of who these legislators happen to be other than the people from our district. So Senator Steinhauer from Hartford, he knows more about these issues than anybody else that I know. And what he was simply trying to do is to get ahead on the Medicaid expansion. Thus, the reason why he brought 186. And the other one saying, look, we better have some money salted away if Medicaid expansion happens. And he's been educating all of us. And the sad thing about it is that Wayne's decided that this is his last year in the Senate. He could have run again. And so you look at these giants. I consider giants that you work with every day for at least 2 years, and you know you're going to lose them. And when you lose them, South Dakota loses because you have this enormous. And I look at Representative Tiedemann and the years that he has spent, and the institutional knowledge that he has, and we lose these people. And you don't feel adequate that you can fill in the gaps. And Steinhauer is an example of that. So is Judge/Senator Art Rush from Vermilion, whom I vote with 99% of the time. Judge/Senator Tim Johns from Lead. These are wonderful people, and they give you insight. And you just hope that the people who are filling in behind them have some of the same tools, some of the same knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you. We started this morning talking about marijuana and money, so we're going to move into a little bit of marijuana stuff. There's all kinds of medical cannabis bills on the table, and one of the current complaints is that there's not a ton of clarity and leadership coming from the state yet to provide guidance to counties and cities. So, Representative Reed, we're going to talk about the status of medical marijuana and how the state is working to provide additional guidance to cities and counties.
So there's been first of all, back up, there was a marijuana committee. They actually split into two groups and then came together again, and one on recreational, one on medical. And so there were bills that they worked through and tried to clarify things. For example, and this just surprised me, coming from being Mayor Brookings, having good zoning, that there's a lot of communities that don't have zoning. And it makes sense when you're in a very small community. Well, if somebody wanted to have a medical dispensary, they could just put it anywhere in that community. So there was a way of saying, okay, even a small city, if they don't have zoning regulations, they can still say no to certain spots. They can still make rules around it. So those kind of things were happening. And I think there was some, I can't remember some of the ones for county. We were seeing a lot of different bills. I think one of the biggest issues right now that we're dealing with, and we'll just talk about medical, is we have the industry that's even trying to pull it further than what the people voted on. Then you've got this committee that's kind of in the middle, and trying to manage it the best way they can. And then you've got those that want it completely open and free. I mean, just wide open and free. And you're trying to balance that all kind of, I'm sorry, I said that wrong. You have the people that just absolutely no to marijuana. You know, the industry is actually lined up with those that really want it just to be totally free. And then you have the folks that are just absolutely against it. So we're in the middle. That's what if you watch what happens, the House at first was very constrictive on the bills that came through that opened up medical marijuana for the first couple bills. And then they kind of started to change and started to go more towards the people voted for this. Let's leave it alone. But there has been some clarifying bills that are good, you know, that have come from the committee that's like, okay, that makes the bill better. It just has better wording in it. It's trying to do the same thing as what originally the people voted on. It just wasn't worded very well. And so that's kind of what we're dealing with when it comes to medical, is trying to balance all that out. But coming over from the Senate will be recreational marijuana. And so that's going to be a real interesting one. I think it's the will of the people. I want to see what the bill says. Just as a side note, we actually had a bill that we even tried to go farther and say you could have it in convenience stores. You know, so you could start to sell the gummies, you could sell a bag right there in a convenience store. As long as they sold beer, they can sell marijuana. And that's where we drew the line. That is one where we drew the line and said, no, you can't do that. We're going to do these through dispensaries. So that kind of gives you an idea of the things that we're dealing with. But next will be recreational marijuana. It's coming over from the Senate. It passed, I think, barely. And now it'll come over to the House, where I think it will fail, but we'll see what happens.
Senator Smith.
Yeah, I served on that summer study last year, and it produced, I believe, around 30 bills. I was on the medical marijuana side, studying the issues rather than the recreational side. I got to tell you, a year ago in March, it was a year ago, I came home from Pierre on a Thursday, and, you know, we were into the last week of the session, and I came home on a Thursday, and on Friday morning at 6 o'clock, I'm on my way to Lincoln, Nebraska to talk. And I got half hour north of Omaha, and my phone rings, and it's a woman that says, "Where are you?" I said, "Why?" She said, "You're on in 20 minutes. I said, "I'm not going to make it." I said, "I'm north of Omaha." She said, "Well, we'll try to rearrange the schedule." And so she called me back in 10 minutes, and she said, "Okay, you're on at 2 o'clock. I got to tell you, I felt terrible. I'd never been late to a talk before. And so when driving through Omaha, my cell phone rings. I look down. It says the governor's office, the state of South Dakota. Those you have to take. And I was talking to the top assistant to the governor, and she wants to talk to me about medical marijuana. And knowing how I felt at that moment, I thought to myself, I'd like to have a little of that medical marijuana right now. So it's been a marijuana-filled experience. Here's a big issue that everybody wrestles with. It came because when IM26 came through, it was an odd language. It said you have to grow a minimum of 3 plants. You had to grow a minimum. You couldn't grow 1, couldn't grow 2, otherwise you're in violation. You could grow 1,000, and you're okay. But the author of the of IM26 said marijuana plants are very difficult, not that I know, are very difficult to grow, and you have to be serious about it in order to make it happen. Well, what happened on the House side is they said no home grow. And on our side, we sent a bill back that said, no, you can grow a maximum of 3 plants, but have 3 immature plants because evidently until they flower, there's no potency. And so it's a back and forth between the 2 chambers. Yeah, Senate Bill 3 that we sent over here in the last week would allow for the recreational use of marijuana. And, most of us are realistic in the Senate. We realize it's going to get killed. But it goes back to the will of the people. And they're going to have a chance to vote on it again. And once again, you worry about whether it goes into a constitution or not, and all that comes with it. And one of the things that we were concerned about was making sure that we took out the home grow element in Senate Bill 3, because it's such an issue. And so I don't know how they're going to react rack to it over there. As Representative Reed said, it's most likely going to die, and the voters are going to have an opportunity to show their voice in November. Thank you.
Representative Tiedemann, your thoughts on that one?
Well, I think they've covered a lot of the things. I'll just talk about something that we haven't talked about. In IM 26 with medical marijuana, it also said that you had to set up this testing site. Well, there's no testing sites in South Dakota. Not just testing how much THC, but also what other inert matter's in there, what pesticides may be in there, and how's the product going to be dispensed. None of that's been done. There is one business that wants to set up a testing laboratory in South Dakota. So, well, you can get it done at the reservation if you're a tribal member, and they don't have to follow a lot of those regulations. So, and maybe you can go down there and get your medical card too. Just don't get picked up driving back to Brookings.
Thank you. On to the money part of our marijuana and money. For current and past appropriators, what is it like to have so much money available for allocation this year as opposed to years past? Representative Tiedemann, we have to start with you.
I say that it's no different than if you don't have enough money. If you don't have enough money, then you probably make better decisions than if you have too much money. I think that you tend to scrutinize things much better. What are the real basic needs that need to be funded when you don't have enough money? The good news, I think, is that the legislature is looking at, with the dollars, that we invest in things that will have a 50-plus year impact, not just immediate needs today, because it's ongoing money we're looking at. It's one-time dollars that can go into facilities or creative ideas. The precision ag and cybersecurity is one-time money bill that I think has a huge impact on South Dakota. Ag uses a lot of technology in farming today. If those things are hacked, your animals could die that quick in the building. Your crops could be destroyed. I call it a food security bill now because it has such an impact on the food source that we have. Go back to World War II. Why did we win? Food. We could provide food to our people, not only at home, but also overseas serving us. So I see that one as a great impact for the future. It's taking DSU, which is #1 in the nation in cybersecurity, and South Dakota State University, who's got the precision ag first major in that country, and putting them together to help solve a problem not only today but into the future.
Thank you. Representative Reed.
Well, just the first thing, there was a big problem with Larry's bill on cyber. It didn't include cyber plumbing. That's an inside joke. Nobody probably will laugh at that one. You had to hear the testimony on the floor, but yeah, not yours. You know, what's interesting is the number of ideas that have come through. I mean, it's a full page. Well, it's a page and a half of ideas, and so it's kind of good to see all those ideas. It's just which ones are going to make it to the top. And just one that I thought was really interesting because it kind of relates to Brookings is there's several communities that want to build jails. They want money to build their jails. And so it's always been kind of fun when they start talking about those bills to say, well, geez, we could do it in Brookings without any state funding because of the planning that was done, the saving that was done, being really conservative with it. So those are the kind of issues that we're dealing with. There's just a lot of different ideas. Basically, some of them are bubbling up to the top. You kind of have a priority list from the House. You have a priority list from the Senate. And then you got the governor's priority list. And then at the end of the session, that's what's happening these next 2 weeks. Everybody gets together, and that's where you start to decide, which bills are actually going to make it through. I would guess, and I don't know, and Tiedemann, you can argue this, but I would guess there's going to be money left over, actually, that will be just put away, and they'll have to figure out what to do with that at a later time. One item that is actually starting to do better is infrastructure for housing. We know we have an affordable housing issue, workforce housing issue in the whole state. And at the beginning of the session, that was really lagging. And I guess it did make it out, kind of wounded, out of appropriations last night. But at least it's probably coming to the floor and it's staying alive. That I think is that a $50 million from general funds? 150 from general funds that could go into affordable housing.
Senator Smith.
Yeah. There has been an enormous amount of money floating around. 3 years ago, you'd argue over $10,000, $15,000. And now, Bill's going to float out in terms of water development, $600 million. It's just mind-boggling. And of course, with those projects, we're talking about moving water from the Missouri River to Aberdeen, and also moving Missouri River water west to the Black Hills. And because in 20 years, according to forecasts, the folks out in the Black Hills are going to be a little bit short on water. And so you're trying to look to the future with these projects. But now that we're on water projects, and I see Jay Gilbertson sitting in the audience, one of the things that I have been pushing, and you all are going to experience it if it's left unattended, happens to be zebra mussels. Northeast corner of South Dakota, there's a major problem. And they're coming up the Missouri River. And it's creating major problems on irrigation systems and also water systems, plugging them up. You probably can't stop them altogether, but we got to figure out something to do to slow them down. Because you go north of Waubay, South Dakota, there are two lakes. One is called Pickerel, and the other one is called Enemy Swim. Pickerel is gone, infested with these zebra mussels. A few miles south of Pickerel is Enemy Swim. It's zebra mussel free. And the difference was Pickerel, really nobody cared. Enemy Swim, Game Fish and Parks, worked with the local homeowners, and they have inspected boats coming to Enemy Swim. So, and there just seems to be somewhat of an indifference from some folks about this whole issue, and I don't get it. Because, ladies and gentlemen, in 8 to 10 years, if it's left alone, when you go to a lake, Lake Campbell, whatever lake you want, you won't be able to walk along the shoreline in your bare feet anymore. Your feet will be cut up by the shells from these zebra mussels. Life will change. It would be unfortunate that people would start paying attention then, because by then it's too late. So that movie and that book in the 1960s said, something wicked this way comes. And they're not from America. They're from Russia. Thought I'd throw that in. Thank you.
Thank you. For those keeping score at home, that's one more for VJ Smith, able to bring in Senate Bill 200 to make sure everybody knows about it. Love it. Last question for today is related to a little bit Senate Bill 124. It failed in committee, but the topic I think is relevant, and that's what measures the state is considering to protect election integrity. Representative Tiedemann, care to venture into that topic?
Well, I think number one, we can be proud of our election in South Dakota. It is very well protected. Our folks at the county level do a great job. I know there's issues where people have addresses in the state because they're retired. So they have an address at Dallas, South Dakota. They have an address in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. It's a post office box. They don't have to pay state income tax here. And they can live in an RV and travel. My question is, how many of them vote in South Dakota? We don't know. I understand that, but we'll talk later, okay? I still say in South Dakota, we are doing a great job with our elections. I applaud the county level, and I have not seen, to any great extent, any problems with our elections.
Representative Reed?
Actually 124 is one that I didn't follow at all. I see it was deferred quite easily in Senate State Affairs, and I'm not sure what that one's about. Just in general, we also had one that wanted a bill that said let's do a forensic audit, but it was only for the presidential elections. And I thought, well, okay, well, wait a minute. This needs to be, if we do have some issues, and like what Representative Tiedemann talked about, do we need to figure out how many, do we actually need to do a study and figure out how many people vote? And I don't know how we do all this, obviously, because your voting information is private, right? You come in, you drop your ballot, so we have to go back and look at how many people vote that are, how do we decide if they're actually not here? If they have a post office box, that doesn't say it either. So, I mean, there's all kinds of things we have to think through. But on the forensic one, they said it's just for the presidential elections. And I'm thinking, well, then really what we're doing is we're arguing the last election. And if you're going to do a bill, you got to do it for the future. And just doing it for the presidential election? Well, what if we had a governor's race that had an issue? Should we be doing forensic audits for them, or even all the way down to our legislative races? And so that was the problem with that bill. I think we always got to be vigilant. We got to keep studying. We got to keep looking at it to make sure there isn't. But we need to be proud of the way that we do it in South Dakota. I followed it all the way through from when I ran, local election. You actually go through, you do the canvassing. I've watched the process for counting. I was a poll watcher, or a poll worker, to see how it's done there. I saw the step all the way along. And then sitting on local government, we went through all those laws. And we do a very good job. We really control our absentee ballots very well. We really have control on them. If anybody's done one, the signatures, if you come here, what you have to do. We've done a good job in the past. And so do we keep looking at it? Yes. We have these bills, we have to look at each one and see what we may or may not need to do.
Senator Smith.
Well, I think it's important that voters feel assured that the process is fair. That's what they want. It's interesting watching the emails, reading the emails that I got. We all received this past year asking us to do a forensic audit of the last election in South Dakota. And to me, it was a request I didn't quite understand, because not one person who lost in November of 2020, statewide or a local election, none of them were requesting a recount. And you think, why wouldn't someone who lost say we need to recount? Why wouldn't someone who lost do that? And frankly, I don't know what all is entailed by a forensic audit. I haven't watched NCIS enough to understand all that. And the unfortunate part about all of this, to me, is that, and it goes back to people have to trust, and this constant conversation and this drum beating about election in 2020 has pulled us further apart. And that's unfortunate. And I know that statewide, these gentlemen and everyone who's involved with the process wants a fair election. We do. And so we'll continue to try to reassure the public that what's being done and what former mayor and now Representative Reed is talking about. And we just want people to trust the process. That's it. We have no nefarious thoughts and ideas. We just want to have people trust the process. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank all of you for being part of today. Thanks to the Public Affairs Committee for putting together a forum. We're going to close things out today with any final remarks from each of you. We'll start on the end with Senator Smith.
Well, we're going into the last 2 weeks. Can't wait to come home and be able to go to Hy-Vee every day. I know some people might think that's funny, but people ask me, whether you go knocking door to door during elections, and a lot of people do that, and I say, do two things: go to Hy-Vee and go to the post office. Pretty much everybody goes there, and so it's really a sense of freedom to come back to Brookings. Although every day that you drive up to the Capitol building, realize that you're going to be going in there and you're going to be voting aye or nay on certain things that affect the people of South Dakota and the people back home. It's an enormous responsibility, and I thank you for the opportunity to do that. So next 2 weeks, we're just going to get it done, you know. We're going to invoke the Larry the Cable Guy rule. Just get her done. That's what we're going to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Reed.
Thank you to the chamber, and thank you for everybody for coming. Appreciate all the information, all the emails that are sent to us. Please always, and actually it's best to put it on top that you're from District 7. That really helps, and that we try to respond to those. Sometimes you get on these systems that'll actually send emails, form emails out for you. By the way, those end up a lot of times in our junk. We actually have to go, our junk file, we actually have to go through and go through those. And usually they're form letters too. So you read one, and when you start getting the same one over and over, they don't make it effort. But if you say, this is what I personally think, it makes a big difference in how we vote, a big difference. And so please keep that information, keep sending us emails and contacting us with what you think on what's going to come up before us. So with that, it's kind of what Senator Smith said. We got our next 2 weeks. It's kind of a grind to get through. It's going to be interesting how the budget all turns out, where the money ends up. I don't think any of us can forecast how that's going to go. It's just because of the amount of money and the number of projects that may be funded. So with that, we'll just I just really do appreciate you all showing up today. Thank you.
Representative Tiedemann.
Well, thank you. And it's really a humble pleasure to represent District 7. People across the state are envious of Brookings. We have a great school system. We have the university. We work together to solve problems. And that's why it's been a joy working with Senator Smith and Representative Reed. We communicate during the day. We try to share ideas across lines. We work very well with our lobbyist that represents Brookings. You can judge a lobbyist by how truthful they are. And Dean and Matt are fantastic to work with. I tell the story about one of my first years out in Pierre. The lobbyist came up to me and he said, would you be willing to sign on that bill? That's when we had to sign on paper, you know. And he looked at me and he said, you're District 7. You don't want to sign on that one. He said, you have a business in your community that would not be very happy with you. I've never forgotten what he told me that day because he was straightforward and honest. And that was great. But it's been, again, a pleasure these last 2 weeks. Yes, there will be a lot of sitting around waiting for the leaders to make the final decisions. But it's driven by the caucuses as to what's going to happen. And then the Appropriations Committee gets to follow the orders and go put it in place. So thank you.
Thank you all for representing District 7 and those of us in the room and watching at home. Thank you for your engagement in the process, certainly for your questions and for your continued involvement as you let them all know your thoughts on various topics. Enjoy the rest of your Saturday.